So just very briefly, just to wake you up. Hey, Seb. It wasn't a workshop without Seb next to me.
Before you were there. Before you were there.
Guys, let's settle down. We're streaming, so let's make a start. Yeah. Cheers. Right. So just to wake you up, Ed's just sent me this message, and we're going to do like a little debug, quick debug, right? So he said, this is my code, and this is my error message. So what was wrong with Ed's code? The what? M. Yeah. So he's just put const port. Yeah, so even though it's underlined port, then we need to declare it as a variable, so const, yeah? So he was having a problem with his Node modules. We think we fixed that, but then unfortunately he's got another error. So just get used to all of these little errors, right? We've had quite a few today. It's been very, very silly errors, right? It's not any fault of yourself. The knowledge is there. The skills are there. It's just these little attention to detail, checking things, which is one of the most important skills as a programmer, right? So everyone makes these errors, but you just get better and better at checking them and interpreting the output as you get more experience, right? Me and Faraj were talking earlier, read your code backwards or just mix up the brain a little bit so that you don't just accept it as it is. You don't just see a C and a T and think, oh, that's const. Yeah, you have to shake up the way you think to be able to spot these errors a little bit. So get used to that process. Alright, so today we are talking about our first back-end workshop. So some of you have started to reach these tasks. So this is conveniently from the app.js file that you have created on the back end. But first we need to understand a few terms. This is going to be a very, very high level overview of back-end versus front-end, client-side versus server-side, these sort of terms. Yeah, do we understand what they mean to begin with? So I've said we're going to do a back-end workshop. What do I mean by back-end? So you're saying back-end and server-side mean the same thing? Why do we have these different terms then if they mean the same thing?
So back-end is like what's under the hood, and front-end is like user sort of.
It's not related to the appearance, but to the...
Okay, so we had a few different options there. People have said back-end is like behind the scene, yeah, what's not visible to the end user, perhaps. Seb, you said something similar, right? You said front-end is to do with the design, what the end user sees. Yeah. You said logic down there, Sonia? Logic, so what the back end's more logic based, is that what you're saying? We can use logic in the front end as well, can't we? Does it have to be on the back end? Yeah. So where does that distinction come in? So yeah, typically it's what most of you have said, and I think this picture illustrates it quite nicely, right? It's not necessarily saying that the back end is all ugly and horrible, although to some people the back end can be a bit monstrous to work with, yeah, and it can be very logic heavy, as Sonia said, but essentially front end is all the stuff that the end user sees, yeah, it's the visible side of your application. So that's the UI, yeah, the user interface is going to be front end. The back end tends to be more of the stuff that we want to keep secret, so we don't actually want to reveal that we're a monster. We're just some siren on the rocks instead to lure the user in and think this is a great project. So yeah, essentially front end just being what the end user sees, the visible part of your application. Back end is hidden. It's on, usually, doesn't have to be, but usually has to be on a server somewhere, and it's not visible code to the user. Yeah. So why do we even bother having a front end and a back end? Why can't we just stick everything on the front end? the backend text is.
Backend is physically.
That's not.
The data has to be sent to the front end. Like the front end by itself doesn't have the data. It has to connect somewhere to.
Okay. Yeah. So Esteban's saying we often store data on the back end. The front end doesn't necessarily have the data. We could store data on the front end though, but there's a few reasons why we wouldn't. Possibly because of the size of it, yeah? So if we've got a huge amount of data, we don't want to run all of that data or store it all on the user's machine effectively. We want that to be stored on an external server.
If you are navigating the web, you're not going to have the entire World Wide Web on your...
Yeah, you don't want the entire World Wide Web on your application. Kathy, share it with the group, yeah? If you've got anything to say. What was your question? To do with the workshop? Yeah, so share it with the group.
Like, no, it wasn't a question. I just said to Sonia that there are things in the database that needs to be stored there.
So why would you need to store stuff in a database? What sort of stuff?
What sort of stuff? Like for example, a list of, in this case, TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
Or users, everything.
So how about security, login data, private information, all this sort of stuff? Do we want all that on the front end? No, right? Definitely not. Yeah, we don't want that just visible to anyone who right-clicks and use DevTools, inspect your application. Yeah, so we need some sort of segregation often in our applications between what the user can see and view or inspect and what's kept private, out of sight on a server. And the most obvious use case is private, confidential data, yeah? It can be any sort of data, but of course you definitely want to have private stuff stored on the back end, yeah? Or all of your company's amazing code that you don't want to be in the public domain, then you'd store it on the back end and you'd only connect to that via an API, all these sorts of things, yeah? So there's an obvious use case to segregate up your applications, yeah?
If it's related to security measures,
Mm-hmm.
why is that traditionally JavaScript wasn't used for backend as well?
Yeah, so traditionally we didn't run JavaScript on the back end, right? Why? Because it only used to run in the browser, yeah? The browser had the engine built into it that could run JavaScript. We didn't have a really useful, secure environment that we could run JavaScript on any computer or any server. Yeah, JavaScript just wasn't inherently secure. It wasn't developed for those reasons. It was developed for a scripting language to be used on the web. Yeah, so when did we get a good, secure environment that we can run JavaScript anywhere? Well, that was probably when Node was introduced. Of course, there were things before this, but the one that really took off and became very, very popular was Node. And we didn't have that until 2009. Yeah, this guy, Ryan Dahl. What did he do? Well, he took the very powerful V8 engine, which is essentially what a JavaScript engine that runs your code in Google Chrome. And he took that and packaged it in a different environment to allow us to run JavaScript code outside of the browser and in a lot more secure way. Yeah? And also gave us access to things that other languages previously did, like access the file system, access lots of external bits and pieces in an application that the browser couldn't securely do. Yeah, so that's why traditionally we needed another language. We needed to access all of these private bits of information securely, and JavaScript was definitely not the language for that in the past. Yeah, so that was 10 years ago, right? And since then, Node's just grown and grown and grown. And lots more companies now adopt it, and they just use JavaScript. Hopefully we're not going to scrap it. They just use JavaScript across the board. Why is that good for companies? Accessibility, maybe.
They just learn
need to learn one language.
They just need to learn one language, right? Previously, they might have needed to hire JavaScript developers and then a PHP developer or a Python developer or whatever as well. Now, they could technically just hire JavaScript developers, which is why you're seeing a lot of startups. They just want JavaScript developers. Yeah, and then you can technically do everything across the board. Front end, back end code, build a whole application just with JavaScript. It's cost cutting, right, for a company. So that's why startups tend to go for it, the mean stack or some of these other stacks that just use JavaScript on both the front end and the back end. Yeah? Any questions about that sort of general overview before I move on? I'll send you these things and you can have a little look at them. Some interesting information there. I won't talk exactly under the hood how Node works, but just know that it can run many operations at once. Yeah, it's not synchronous. It doesn't block your code. Yeah, it's non-blocking, so we can run lots of different processes at once very quickly. And the event loop built into Node handles all these requests and callbacks and things. Used by lots of big companies. Yeah, eBay, Microsoft, Yahoo all use Node for their applications. So yeah, if it's good enough for those companies, usually it's good enough for a startup, right? Of course, we're a JavaScript bootcamp, so we're going to push it a little bit. No? Shall I move on? So the other thing that I said is what's the difference between front end and back end versus client side and server side? So some people were saying maybe these things are synonymous, maybe they're the same. So typically, what would you associate front end with? Client side or server side? Client side, yeah. So what do we mean by a client? We mean, I don't think I've got a good picture of this, sorry. But we mean your laptop, your mobile phone, your fridge that connects to the internet, whatever it is nowadays, right? This is the client's machine, the client's processor. Yeah, so client-side code would run on the client's machine. Yeah, not your servers as a developer, but whatever device they're connecting to your application with. That would be client-side code. So therefore, is all front-end code client-side code? That's the question really, isn't it? So is all the code that deals with the presentation of your application, does that have to run on the client's machine?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, no. Where could it run? It could be run on the server, yeah. So have you heard of server-side rendering before?
Yeah.
The term server-side rendering?
The processing time and reloading the frame page.
Yeah, so essentially the server would do the heavy lifting. It would essentially draw your page or a template of your page of how it looks and then send that information over to the front end, mostly already laid out how it's going to appear, rather than sending the data to the client and getting the browser to draw everything. Yeah. PHP could have been used for server-side scripting, exactly, yeah, and that would template the page, yeah.
Is that's the same as load management, right?
Load management.
Yeah. Is it as in you saying server-side rendering?
You've sort of, yeah. I don't think those terms are exactly the same. Yeah, but so in other words, we can have front-end code running on the server, yeah? Just wouldn't run client-side. It might run on the back end, send a template over. So they're not quite the same, right? We often use them interchangeably, but there can be slight differences. And server-side just means it doesn't run on the client's machine, right? It runs on a server somewhere else. Google servers, wherever you're hosting your app, Heroku, all those sorts of things, yeah? Cool. They were the main terms that I wanted to cover. Any questions before we dive into some code? So where does the database sit? Yeah, good question. So does the database run all its queries on the client's machine or does it sit somewhere else? So what two words could we use to describe it? Is it front end, back end, client side, server side? What do you think? It's definitely back end, yeah, because that often holds confidential data, yeah, secret data or secure data that we don't want anyone to just be able to access and sell your details, you know, on the black market or whatever. So backend databases, yeah, databases definitely on the back end. So we'll see later on in the course how we use Node to connect securely to a database and then retrieve the information from the database and then send, you know, the necessary parts to the front end, which are of course going to be visible.
Can you store databases into a cloud?
Yeah, of course you can store a database in the cloud. Yeah, and that's what, you know, if you get that far, we'll be doing that. Yeah, we'll have a remote database stored on a server somewhere else. Yeah, so it's also server side. Yeah, databases are server side. They run on the server somewhere else. They're not stored generally on a user's computer, although we do have things like IndexedDB and local storage, which almost fulfill the gap of the database on the user's machine, right? But we wouldn't store too much on there.
Would it be accurate to say that the front-end code is the code that you can see?
Yeah. Front-end code's the code that you can see, definitely, right? It's this bit, the pretty girl on the rocks.
You can't inspect. I mean, that like front-end is the one you can inspect, like you have access to it, and the back-end is the one you can't because it's...
Yeah, the back end you can't access directly from the client's machine, yeah, but the user might fill in a form or request some data from the website, and then via Node or via another back-end language, it will connect to the server, get the data, and then finally connect. No?
You can't see it directly on the inspect.
No, you can't directly access the back-end, no. It has to be via some sort of you can't directly access that back-end data. Yeah, it has to be some sort of application, some sort of API. Yeah, Kelly mentioned third-party APIs. When you query the Facebook or the Twitter API, you don't automatically get access to their servers, do you? They just send the bits back that you want.
So when you right-click on inspect, that's just front-end.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Anything else?
JavaScript is now used in backend.
JavaScript now is used everywhere. Yeah.
I noticed through the banks they use a lot of Java.
Through what, sorry? Banks use a lot of Java. Yeah, I'm sure they do. Yeah.
You know what? Because they can't, because there's such a big compliance and security is their main thing, so they can't just change over as quickly as other companies. So banks would be about 3-4 years behind in terms of tech typically, because they can't shift up until compliance checks over.
Banks that still use COBOL and from...
Exactly. Yeah. Some banks are still using Cobalt and things like this. Yeah. Old languages, secure code. Yeah.
COBOL for uni.
Should we jump into a bit of code? Back into our React app, yeah? So we'll just use the CodeFlix example again because a lot of you are coming onto these tasks now. So I've partially rolled back an application, and one of the first tasks we get you to build is just to build a backend server, effectively, right? This is what you're building in your app.js. And the code should look a little bit, eventually, like this. I won't talk too much about Express, but as it's the first line there, I feel I've at least got to mention it. So what is Express? It's a framework, yeah. It's a framework for building out Node applications, yeah. What is it usually used for? What are the highlights of Express? So it's very, very good at handling HTTP requests and setting up routes. Handling HTTP requests. So what is HTTP? Yeah, nice. Hypertext transfer protocol, essentially how we send information over the web, yeah? How we communicate between the front end and the back end. Yeah, it's a protocol, it's a standard that's been developed over time, and mainly what the internet uses, or one of the protocols the internet uses, yeah? So HTTP built into it has a number of requests. Can anyone name some? Do we know what HTTP requests are out there? A GET request, yeah. Put, yeah. Post. Yeah, these sorts of things, yeah, update, delete. Now, Express is very good at handling all of these requests. And that's essentially what you're using it for here on line 9. Yeah, you're handling a GET request. So that when someone makes a GET request to the server, hey server, I want some information, please, then your server, the code you write on your server will determine what sort of response you send. Yeah, what sort of information you send back from your backend back to the front end. So on the first line, we've just imported Express to make things easier for us. It's easier to write code with Express than it is with Node, just vanilla Node, if you like, right? The same way as vanilla JavaScript, right, Bilal? Yeah. Just without any extra frameworks or libraries. It's a bit longer. It takes more time to use, to develop with. So that's one of the reasons why we use Express. It's very good for setting up our app handlers. Path, yeah, don't worry about that now. Again, it's just another module that we can use to bring some extra functionality to Node. Yeah, don't worry too much. So the first task is to store our back-end data, right? We were going to say, yeah, so something like that, right? You had some data stored on the back end for your movies. So you had an array of objects with a title, an ID, and a synopsis that you could use to display that, essentially, right? You've got a title, synopsis, and your image eventually, but we don't do that at this stage. We handle the image later on. So
you said Express is a framework.
Express is a framework, yeah, used for developing Node applications.
React is a framework? Or
React's a library, so more used on the front end, right, to design user interfaces, how it looks, yeah? So Express is the back-end library, React is the front-end library, if you want to make that distinction, mainly.
But one is framework and the other library.
Yes, yeah, React's library, no. So framework tends to have a lot more built into it, and you have to do things the way the framework says you have to do them. React gives you a bit more freedom, right? It gives you the building blocks, but you can essentially create an application however you want to. Yeah, framework, you're locked into doing it the Express way. Yeah, it's already built the scaffolding of the building for you, and you just add the contents. Whereas a library, just building blocks, bricks on the ground, you stack them up however you want. Yeah. Cool. So the code. Let's talk about this line here because this is the most important for this stage. So app, what does that refer to? It refers to Express in this case, right? You see line 2, const app equals Express. So that gives us access to the Express framework. .get, this syntax, the dot syntax, where do we often see it?
Classes?
We could see it in classes, yeah, but classes create what? From this morning? Yeah, a class creates an object, yeah? So, .get means Express has inside of it a method called get that we're invoking using the dot syntax. That method requires, well, in this case, 2 arguments, but at least 2 arguments, yeah? The first argument needs to be the path, so let me just write another one. So if we've got an app.get, so it's get because it's going to handle a get request, a HTTP get request. The first argument is the path. By the path I mean what they have typed into the address bar on your browser. So when you want to go to Google, what do you do? Well, I'm already at Google, it's not a good example, but if I went to go to JavaScript info, which is a really good documentation site, I would type javascript.info. Yeah? What this does is it makes a GET request to the javascript.info servers. And that returns all this information from their servers for me. Yeah? So whenever you type anything in here, a HTTP GET request has been made. Maybe I meant Euro, I'm not too sure. But at least I haven't got Arabic this time. Yeah? I managed to speak Arabic to Google earlier. So. Cool. So, the first argument is the path. So whatever I type in to my URL. So we're saying when someone types REST shows or gets redirected to REST shows by our application, we write a function. Oops. That does something. So this is just an arrow function, right? We're used to that syntax now. So our route handlers in Express tend to take two arguments. What do you think these stand for? REQ and RES. Say again, Kieran? Request and response. Exactly. So they take a request argument, and look, it even suggested it for me, I think, didn't it? Oh, it's gone now. But a request and a response. What's the request?
What you're typing.
Is it called a query string?
Just in general, it doesn't have to be a certain thing, but in general it's just the information that we send to the server, right? So our request is what's incoming to our backend. Our response is what the backend sends back to the client, yeah? Back to us as a user. Does that make sense? Yeah, so the response is what we're sending back to the user. So here we're saying response.send. What do you think that's doing? Yeah, it's sending, right? It's sending some data, some information back to the person on our website, to the person browsing our website. So that's what this command's doing, sending something back when someone visits rest.shows. So if I went to rest.shows, sorry, you won't be able to see me type it. I'm typing in rest shows. Then we get our show data. You see it's got a title, an ID and a synopsis. Right, that's what we want to send back to the user. And then we write some code on the front end to not display this, because I imagine most users don't want to see all the information like that. It's not very pretty. It's pretty monstrous still. So we can, I've even made it look prettier by my little extension. So we can make it look like that instead. It's the same data, but we've just written some front end code to display it nicely, have a bold title, some text on the left, and a picture on the right. Yeah, essentially the data's the same, but we've got extra code on the front end to make it look pretty. Sort of pretty, yeah. So how about we have a go at writing our own route, and then we leave it there for today, and we'll talk a lot more about the back end in the coming week. Yeah. Any questions before we write our own route? Any questions on this sort of code here?
So you said it's 3 arguments.
No, two arguments. How many is there? Look, the first is the path, the second is a function. Yeah, I haven't finished it off, but I've just given you the template, if you like, for creating a GET request handler. Request and response are the two parameters of your second parameter that you send to your GET request. Yeah, it's a bit complicated, but it's just a function. Yeah.
So The dir name.
dir name, where are you? What line?
16.
Yeah, so I don't want to cover this yet, but this comes from the path module up here, yeah, that allows us to dynamically set directories and things like that. It's useful for when we're creating static files on a server and we want to make sure that they get given their correct path name, because a lot of bundlers like Webpack and things will move around all your files and optimize them. So just because it's stored in Backend app in your application on your computer means that when it's bundled, it won't necessarily still be in backend app.js, right? It will be all optimized for performance by tools like Webpack. Yeah. All right. Any questions, or should we have a go at writing our own route? Yeah. So I'm just going to call my route team effort. All right. So when someone goes into my application and types /team effort, we want to send them some information. How am I going to send them something? Yeah, so my second argument needs to be a function. Let's write it the same way as we've done down here, as an arrow function, right? Because it's the more modern way to do it. So let's create an arrow function. Do I need any arguments in my arrow function?
Yeah, you should at least one.
At least one, but the convention is to always just put request response.
And res.send.
Yeah, then we need to have a response that actually sends some information. And what would you like to send to our team effort route? Well done, team. I like that, yeah. So we can send literally a string back saying, well done, team. Yeah. Let's see whether it works. App.get, so I think my brackets have messed up somewhere, so do I need any more brackets anywhere, guys?
Oh yeah, need one more.
One more where?
And closing bracket after.
Yeah, there, right? Okay, that looks good. You probably should have a semicolon. That's me again, Bilal. You know what I'm like. I think all the others are there, or maybe not. App.listen one. So, let's see whether it's worked. How am I going to check whether that has worked?
You're going to put that in your URL.
I'm going to put that in my URL, in my app. So, previously we went to /rest/shows, and that gave me my data. If I want to see my message, I go to, what was it called?
Yeah.
Team effort, yeah. Oh, looks like this page doesn't exist.
So the front end server.
I think that's because I haven't restarted my application. Let's check my script, npm start. npm start, have we got both? Could do a start dev instead maybe. npm run start dev. Okay, let's try once more. Still awake, Kate? Just about. I'm just checking you're still awake.
No, I'm not sleeping.
Just comfortable. Yeah, okay, sure. So we go to team effort and we see, well done team. Nice. Yes, we don't just have to send text, of course, but we try and keep the format as simple as possible to send over the server. So even when we're sending all of our shows data, we sent it over as an array, right? So shows.data was an array of objects. Yeah, so pretty simple data still. Yeah, we send over only what's necessary. Everything else we can just process on the back end. We can do some heavy lifting on the back end and send over our just the raw data that we need to actually display something on the screen to the front end. Yeah, so it's another reason why we might need a back end. What computer's more powerful? Past students' 10-year-old laptop or a server at Google supercomputer sort of thing, right? Probably it's the supercomputer at Google. I'm just guessing. So we probably want the back end to do some heavy lifting, and then we just send a very small amount of data to the front end that can get displayed on the user's machine. Yeah, that sort of stuff. Kieran's looking puzzled again. Intrigued. Okay, I like that better. Thank you.
I was just thinking about when you upload a done website
Yep.
to a provider, like
To GoDaddy, yeah.
doing this, is it the same thing? Doing the same thing?
So generally with a website like GoDaddy, you just send them static files, right?
Yeah.
And they handle all the back-end code for you. Yeah? You generally haven't set up, oh, when my user types in a certain route, then I'm going to send them a certain file. You generally haven't done that with a GoDaddy website, right? I don't even know whether you can with them, whether they let you play around with backend or they don't for security reasons, right? But obviously if you're working at a company, then you want full control over your application and you want to be able to write both the front end and the back end code. But essentially they will have some route handlers set up, yes, so that when your user navigates around your site, interacts with your site, all certain assets get sent out to them piece by piece. And I guess they've got a process to optimize it so your app runs well on their servers, yeah?
So once you know this, you don't have to upload it to Wi-Fi.
No, what have you been doing? You've just done it to Heroku, right? And Heroku runs your back end and your front end. Your back end does all the logic of what you need to send out when and where. You don't need to hand it over to another organization to handle the back end for you. You can do, and a lot of people like this way of developing now. If they're mainly a front end developer, but they need control of the application, they can use other projects, right? They can use a serverless product or something like Firebase, which makes the back end very easy to scale up and build, and then they can just worry about how their app looks and plug it into some pre-built sort of back-end code that will provide them with the services or the database or whatever that they need. Yeah.
So do a lot of startups do that as well in terms of you'll get a client that they're offering both front and back, but actually startup would give the back end to a GoDaddy, or would they do that? It just depends on the
It depends on the skills, right, of the people who work for the startup, but tends to be the smaller you are and the less skilled you are. Well, not necessarily less skilled, but just how quickly you want to produce things as well, right? If some of these services are pre-built and you don't have to write Node and Express code from scratch, then you might want to plug into existing services that streamline the process for you. Yeah. But it's growing in popularity, I think, definitely that sort of approach. Cool. Anything else? Because I want to leave it there for now so we don't get too bogged down in the monstrous back end. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Cheers. Oh, and I'll send you a couple of articles that just explain the differences between front end and back end very nicely, in my opinion. All right.
I like the picture.
Yeah, I can send you the picture as well if you want. But
In terms of like the green, you can't see the back of the green. All the other stuff.
try and write beautiful back end code as well, but sometimes it can get a bit ugly to begin with. Unless dragons are your thing, well, they might be. Yeah, yeah.
That's big abstract.
You got a lot to say about yourself, Bilal.
Got a lot to hear about.